All right, guys, today we're talking about how to write your thesis. And of course, when we're thinking about writing your thesis, it's really just the answer to the question. So we start with the prompt. And the prompt is what we looked at last time. But how does the author use language purposefully to achieve an effect is the question you are answering and the question your thesis should answer. So below is an example of a thesis that works. In the Odyssey, translator Robert Fagles develops the conflict between Odysseus and Circe. That's the effect that is achieved, and then it has a transition word specifically, and it branches out into 3 pieces of language that do that. So specifically, positive word choice describing Circe. I spelled Circe wrong, sorry. Part 2, negative word choice describing Penelope, and Part 3, negative word choice about Odysseus's fate. Those are going to be the 3 topics that each get developed in one paragraph. So this all relates to what we did last class, because last class, with that prompt in mind, you read and you identified types of language that you found, hopefully that achieved some sort of big effect. You kind of read thinking about what the effect was and noticed language that did it. And so it's always good to have read and noted what language is even in the text first, because for each type of language you choose to put in your thesis, and you need to choose 3, you need to find at least 3 examples so you can support it effectively with your with a paragraph about each of those 3 examples. So when I think about a thesis, I think about like a tree, actually, because there are 3 branches, really, like 3 types of languages. But it all has to come back to that stem, like the trunk of a tree. So I think of the stem, like this little gray tree here, that's like the effect. Everything relates to the effect. Everything is connected to the effect. There's a little conjunction, which is like the word specifically, that just signals that you're about to get into your examples. And then the branches, I'm not sure if you can see all branches on the screen, but each of the branches is one way that effect, in this case the conflict, is achieved. So we've got stem, main answer, that is the effect created, conjunction, just signaling you're about to get more specific, and branches, 3 different types of language that achieve that effect. So step 1 is taking the prompt and making sure that you fully answer it. So I basically take my prompt and turn it into a statement, leaving blanks where I know that I need to fill in specifics. So in the text, author creates an effect. I have to say that because that is my stem. I have to answer it to answer my prompt. Then I've got my conjunction, specifically, so that signals I'm about to go into my branches and get more specific about how the effect is achieved through language, because that is what my question asks. And then I colored my 3 branches in green. Specifically, this effect is created through 1, 2, and 3, so I will look through my text and try to decide what kinds of language might I have enough examples of to write a paragraph about, and to have enough examples means 3 examples. And all of those types of language have to add into the effect I achieved, the effect I chose. So you should have done this last class, but basically don't start writing your thesis until you make sure you have enough evidence. Make sure you've read the text, make sure you've read all the examples of language, and think about like, okay, here are my examples. What effect is created by them? They all have to relate back to that stem, because that is the core of that runs through your whole thesis. Just like if you have no trunk to your tree, then it's not really a tree. And then once you've established that effect, that stem, you are going to find 3 branches, 3 types of language that create that effect. And you're going to also find that through looking at your examples. So here I'm going to look for repeated use of types of language. So you might want to get really broad, like, okay, I've got to find one way we see tension around Odysseus leaving, we see that conflict. I'm looking through my examples. Lustrous Calypso, Calypso never ages or dies. That's like a little bit of a pattern, because these are both positive examples of talk, of word choice about Calypso. If I can find a 3rd example of positive word choice about Calypso, I have enough to establish a branch, and I do think that ultimately supports the tension around Odysseus leaving and that conflict. All right, so that's it. Today, as you work on writing your thesis, always start by rereading the prompt, then reread your annotations. Make sure you've committed to your stem. That's the trunk of your tree. That is the main effect created. That's really the core of the question I'm asking. And then once you've chosen that effect, reread your evidence. Consider, are there patterns? Can you find 3 examples of different types of language? And if you can find 3 examples and they do achieve your effect, that is enough for a branch, which are those kind of support paragraphs of your thesis.